Hello and welcome to End of Life University. I'm your host, Dr. Karen Wyatt, author of the book What Really Matters, and I'm so glad that you're here joining me again today for another interview. I really appreciate having an audience out there to listen to these conversations. And I'm delighted today to be welcoming a guest who brings in a fresh, new perspective to this subject of death and dying. And I think you're really going to enjoy this interview too with Kelvin Chin. And I'd like to tell you a little bit more about Kelvin before we start our conversation. Kelvin is the executive director and founder of the Overcoming the Fear of Death Foundation. He focuses on helping people improve the quality of their lives now by overcoming their fear of death and by developing a more balanced and enjoyable life mentally, physically, emotionally by turning within through meditation. Kelvin has helped people worldwide with death and dying issues since the 1980s and has taught meditation to more than 1,000 people since the 1970s in schools, businesses, the U.S. Army, and at West Point. His nonprofit, Overcoming the Fear of Death Foundation, helps people improve their quality of life through an approach that is grounded in understanding death more clearly and aligning that understanding more accurately with each of our respective belief systems, whatever they may be. Kelvin also had a 40-year career in corporate and legal services working with Fortune 500 companies, has taught numerous CEU and CLE seminars for the healthcare and legal industries, was a state-certified long-term care ombudsman for the California Department of Aging, and co-founder of the Center for Medical Ethics and Mediation. He is a graduate of Dartmouth College, Yale Graduate School, and Boston College Law School, lives in Austin, Texas, and has lectured extensively throughout the United States and in 6 other countries. His new book, Overcoming the Fear of Death Through Each of the 4 Main Belief Systems, will soon be available. The foreword of the book is currently on his foundation's website, which is where you can go to learn more about Kelvin and all of his work at overcomingthefearofdeath.org. Kelvin, thank you so much for joining me today.
Oh, thank you for having me, Karen. Really appreciate it.
Well, I've been excited to talk to you because you're one of the few guests I've interviewed who is not part of either the healthcare system or the funeral industry or even the kind of the alternative death industry. You, with your background in business and law, you really bring a unique perspective to this whole subject of death and dying, and particularly the fear of death. And so I'm really excited to hear what you have to say.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, it's an unusual background that I bring, and I'm sure we'll get into how I get into it and so forth. But for the most part, I spent my career in business and law, and doing this work with helping folks with death and dying, mostly as an adjunct to that kind of day job that I had.
Well, why don't you tell us how you did get interested in helping people with the fear of death?
Sure. So what happened with me is, in my 3rd year of law school, my mom passed away, and it was very difficult for me. It was very quick. She was gone in a matter of a few short months. It was lung cancer that had already metastasized to her brain to such an extent that I remember the oncologist told us that her brain looked like raisin bread. There were so many tumors in it, and so she passed away very quickly, and it was a shock to all of us. And for me, law school is difficult enough, and then I'm going through that, and then my mom is dying, and she passed away in my 3rd year, and I basically worked through that grieving process and that loss of my mother on my own. It was kind of the ultimate self-help process of dealing with my mom's death and dying, and as a result, I came out the other side, worked through it, and you know how you kind of walk around sometimes and people will ask you, well, how are you doing? And usually most of us, I think we just say, oh yeah, we're doing okay, and you just kind of don't want to get into a long, detailed discussion. Maybe you're busy and you got to get someplace. But I started telling people. I was working in a law firm at the time, part-time, and in Boston, and people would ask me at law school, so how you doing? And I just say, I'm okay, but my mom just passed away. And as soon as I said my mom passed away to people, people started opening up. You know how self-disclosure can do that for people. They feel more open. You've trusted them in a sense with something intimate and personal, and then they just immediately start to trust you and share something with you. So people would say, oh, my grandmother just passed away. Oh, my brother just had a motorcycle accident and he passed away. All this stuff that normally people are walking around all pent up, they don't talk about it. And so I started just sharing with people in that way, and they started sharing with me, and they say, well, how did you handle it, and da-da-da-da, and that's how it started. So that was about 30 years ago. And so I did that nights and weekends throughout my 40-year corporate and legal career, and decided to do it full time now. And so about a year ago, I started this nonprofit organization here in Austin, and I've been speaking around the country, and I'm working with people around the world. It's pretty amazing what the need is.
Yeah, it's fascinating to me. One thing I observe through doing all the interviews I've been doing with people in all walks of life, doing all types of work, each one of us has been called in some way to do the work. And for many of us, it is because of a loss, because of the death of someone we love, that has brought us to this realization that the whole world needs help with death. Everyone needs some sort of help to get through that. And I love it that you just bring a different perspective, because you're a lay person, and so you're not hung up on medical definitions, or you're not hung up on talking about any of those details. You can simply share that human understanding of this experience of the death of someone you love, and then also facing your own death, the awareness of your own death as a result of that.
Exactly. So, it was, I've used that terrible life event of my mom passing away as an opportunity to get my own mind around it, because that's what helped me pull myself out of, kind of the dark side, just being so sad about it, et cetera, and to some extent overwhelmed, but not visibly overwhelmed. There's a lot of us who are walking around, and I was one of them. I'm sure people did not realize externally how hurt and how shaken I was inside at the time, because we culturally we do a really good job at masking things. And for me, what helped me get past that was increasing my understanding about death and dying, and thinking about it from that perspective, because there's plenty of people, and I'm certainly one of them as well. We all do this, where we wrap our physical arms and we wrap our mental and emotional arms around people and support them emotionally when they're going through a grieving process, whether it's about themselves, their own, gradual slipping away through some illness or whatever, or whether it's the loss of a loved one. We wrap our arms around them physically and emotionally, and that's a good thing. And I call that the inspirational approach. It's kind of the supportive, knee-jerk default approach that we all have as human beings, and I think it's a good thing. But at the same time, there's many people out there who do a great job in that supportive kind of role. And so I looked at what was available in terms of helping me, and I thought, well, there's plenty of that. What's not available is getting a better understanding about death and dying, regardless of what the person's belief system is. And so I started doing that many years ago, decades ago, and that's what helped pull me out of this. And so I've been applying that approach, which is I've learned, like you say, I'm a layperson, so I've learned that that's a different approach than what's normally out there. So there's kind of two facets to that. One is increasing people's understanding about death and dying to help reduce their fears about death and dying through their particular lens. So the second part is through their lens, and that second part includes the whole notion that it doesn't matter for me. It doesn't matter what their belief system is about death or religion, or about God or no God. If they were atheist, it doesn't matter what the person's belief system is. I help them look at the death and dying process through their lens, and thereby help them reduce their fears. Because ultimately, what is it all about? It's about reducing our fears so that we can live more in the present, in the now, in the moment, with our family, our friends, our loved ones who are here with us, and the people we work with, and however we're engaging with the world. It's about living more fully now, and so that's the ultimate objective of the work that I do.
Mm-hmm. And I know, Kelvin, you've written about 4 main belief systems around death, and so I was wondering if you'd tell us a little bit about
Sure.
those 4 systems that you see.
Sure. So first of all, I've broken it up into 4 main belief systems that, regardless of what religion a person is, regardless of what culture they're from in the world, it doesn't matter. They can find, they will hear they'll hear the 4 belief systems, and they'll see, oh, that one over there, that's the one that I fit into. They may have a whole host of other beliefs that are around it because of culture or religion or lack of organized religion. They may have their own kind of formulation from a spiritual standpoint, but they'll fit somewhere in one of these 4. So these 4 belief systems, from a religious or a belief sense, even in and of themselves, are fairly generic. They're not real specific in terms of, you'll see when I lay them out. And the other thing is that they're guidelines. They're not absolutes. It's not like, oh, these are the only 4 belief systems that could ever exist. I think when you'll hear them, you'll find that there may be another way of expressing a belief system that may fall underneath one of the 4 that I lay out. But I'm not here to say, from a dogmatic standpoint, this is the way it is. These are the 4 belief systems. No, they are guidelines. They are a way for us to have a fairly organized discussion around death and dying. That's the purpose of why I laid them out this way. So the first belief system is the belief system that my dad had, which was, when the body dies, the mind dies. So the belief system that those people have is that when the brain basically shuts off, it stops functioning, then the mind turns off. They believe that the mind and the brain are one. And that's the first belief system. And the second belief system is, the body dies, the mind continues. But there's a little bit of a twist here, slight coloration, in the sense that the mind continues, but with fear. So there's a fear that goes along with the mind after the body dies, although the mind is continuing. So the mind continues to exist. I call it the fear of continued existence, the second belief system. Mm-hmm. The third belief system is kind of a variation on the second one, but I separate the two for discussion purposes, as I said, just to kind of have a more specific and organized discussion about it. Third belief system is, body dies, mind continues, and it transitions to something. We may, depending on what our culture or religious beliefs are, we may label it a certain thing, but I just call it continues. Maybe call it afterlife, whatever you want to call it. But the mind continues and it transitions, but there's no fear involved with the third belief system. And the fourth belief system is the mind continues after the body dies, and it transitions to another state, and then at some point it may decide, the mind, And by the way, when I say mind, I mean the mind, soul, spirit, consciousness, awareness. Sometimes people talk about energy or whatever. So I'm not just talking about the individual mind that's deciding what I'm speaking about right now, or moving my hands and so forth. I'm talking about the fullness of the human mind. So in the fourth belief system, the mind continues, and the mind may decide to come back in another lifetime and have multiple lifetimes in that way, a future life, past lives, that idea, the idea of reincarnation. So that's the fourth belief system.
And I find that very interesting because I agree with you. Breaking it down by those four belief systems makes more sense to me actually than trying to explore the belief systems of any one particular religion, because I agree with you. I've seen all four of these beliefs within any religion,
Right.
So this makes more sense, and it gives us a little bit more of a commonality with which to look at beliefs, and
Yes.
to really understand what's behind each belief system, or how can you engage with people within each one of those systems to help them with their fear.
That's exactly right, and that's a very good point. And that's there's a lot of underlying objectives, I guess, that I've kind of since realized, just in the way I articulate and think about things. But one of them is what you just articulated, which is to try to help people look at things more from a commonality standpoint as opposed to a difference standpoint. We're also caught up in, very often worldwide, looking at the differences, and it's not that we don't have differences. We absolutely have differences, and I think that differences should also be embraced. But there's an amount of energy that we also need to spend on looking where, what I call is where's the overlap of the Venn diagram? The old, I don't know if is that geometry or algebra. I think it's geometry. But anyway, mathematics, where the two circles overlap. Where's that commonality? So my mediation background, I think that's how I'm wired. That's my kind of default wiring. Where is the commonality? The other thing that I want to mention that you remind me of is with these four belief systems, there may be hybrids. One person may have a hybrid. They may, and I've run into this in my speaking engagements. I'll be speaking to 100 people or whatever, and I'll lay out the four belief systems first before I get into a discussion of what, how to reduce the fear as it relates to each of them. I'll just lay them out first, real quick, and then I'll say, okay, show of hands, how many people are in the first belief system? And it depends on the group, but if there's more than 20 people in a group, it's pretty much guaranteed there's going to be at least somebody in all of the four belief systems. And I say, how many of you raise your hands? How many of you are not sure? And then 6 or 8 people out of a group will raise their hands, and you feel like you're maybe in a hybrid, and they'll laugh. And I said, that's totally okay. That's totally fine. These are not hard and fast. This is not about, quote unquote, getting it right. This is about your beliefs, and your beliefs can change over time, and they do change, and it's normal for them to change, and that's totally okay. So sometimes people are on the fence, or they may have a mix. I'll give you an example. I was talking with somebody yesterday, contacted me from having seen my website, and he said that he thought his belief system was the first belief system, the one where mind stops. Mind dies when the body dies. But he also articulated to me that he has a tremendous fear, a debilitating fear about non-existence after he dies. Well, I pointed out that part of what I do with people is help clarify what their fears are. Mm-hmm. First of all, clarify first what their fears are of, because a lot of people are walking around with fears that they articulate in a certain way, and they don't realize that they don't have that fear. It's a different fear. Or they may think they have 10 fears, and they really only have 2 fears. And so it's important to get clarity for several reasons. One is which is that, to kind of narrow it down. Okay, what is your fear of? and that immediately releases some pent-up energy that they're carrying around and frees them of that binding influence, so to speak, that contracting influence of the fear, because they don't really have it, but they have a different fear. And the other reason is then you can kind of figure out what is a best solution for that particular fear once you've identified what the fear is. So in his case, I pointed out to him, I said, well, think about it. If you are afraid, if you have that first belief system, and you're afraid of your non-existence after it, and that terrifies you, that makes no logical sense, because what's fear? Fear is the emotion associated with the anticipation of unhappiness. The emotion associated with the anticipation of unhappiness. Well, if you believe, like my dad did, that you're going to end when your physical body ends, your mind is going to end also, you're not going to have any experience, happiness or unhappiness, after your physical body dies, if that really is your belief system. And so then you should be like my dad, which he was. He was not afraid of death. He just lived life as fully as he could while he was here, and that's how he lived life. That was his, based on his belief system. He understood his belief system for what it was. Now, this gentleman I spoke with yesterday, I pointed it out to him, and he said, oh, yeah, that makes sense. And so we got a little bit of clarity there. And I said, but really what I hear you likely saying is that you have a little bit of fear about what may happen afterwards because you're not sure. There's an uncertainty. And I point out that to everybody. And nobody's going to know till they know. We don't know for sure till we actually do die.
Exactly.
To some extent, it's conjecture. To a large extent, even in my lectures and in my book, where I talk about other people's experiences, friends, and these are all people I know, friends of mine over the years, and some of which are my experiences. But even if somebody expresses a near-death experience to you, like several of my friends have had near-death experiences, and I've heard about them at least secondhand from them, then that's their experience. It's not your experience. So, and even if it is your experience, that's your interpretation of that experience. So, we don't know till we know, but my thing is, how can I help this gentleman now, in the present? And so we helped clarify that with him yesterday, and he saw that, in fact, he had this fear that was about continuation afterwards, and then I'm helping him deal with his anxiety more on a neurophysiologic level. So both from an understanding standpoint and an experiential standpoint by turning within. So I tell people when I give lectures, it doesn't matter to me how a person turns within to try to deal with their anxieties and their fears on a neurophysiologic level, not on an intellectual level, not on a talking about it level, but on a mind-body level through meditation, through some other technique, some other practice. For some people, prayer is very powerful. And I'm not talking, I've given lectures to fundamentalist Christian groups. And I tell them, I said, look, I'm not talking about the type of prayer where you're asking for something. I'm talking about that moment when you may be in church, and I'll ask people, how many have ever had this experience where they're in church, where their eyes are closed? Maybe you're praying, maybe you're not praying, but you're sitting there quietly, and you have a sense of self. You have a sense of your mind that's bigger than the normal mind that you're walking around with on a daily basis. Everybody has raised their hands when I ask that. I said, well, that's what I'm talking about when I'm talking about turning within and connecting with ourselves, knowing thyself, connecting with ourselves in that different way from the way we normally connect with ourselves in a waking, walking around waking state.
Yeah. So I love that you use that. That's the technique that you teach people in dealing with their fear is something as simple as just going inside themselves in order to know
Right.
themselves better.
Right. Exactly. So I point out to them that they're knowing themselves not better from a content-oriented standpoint, not from an intellectual standpoint. They're knowing themselves, exploring themselves inwardly, and that will help relax them, and that will help, obviously, release their anxieties and their fears and so forth, regardless of an analysis, with no analysis of that. Now, if they want to work with a therapist, which I encourage them to do professionally, and look at it more from an analysis standpoint and kind of looking where the fear is coming from, that is different. That's a separate approach, and it's a valid approach, and it's a valuable approach. So I encourage people to go that route as well, but I make it clear that that's not what I'm doing with them. So my approach is more non-content oriented, turning within, and then externally oriented, increasing their understanding through their belief system about death and dying, whether it's about their own death or others. And I always point out to people, it's valuable for all of us to learn about everybody else's belief system. I was doing this in-service training that I had mentioned to you earlier with these 150 healthcare workers, and most of them were Christian, and they let me know that, and I said that's fine, but understand that not all of your clients, your patients, may be Christian. You may run into a Buddhist, you may run into an atheist, you may run into a Hindu, a Sikh, or who knows what. And it's not that you need to understand all the details of their religion, but you should understand the overarching belief systems that encompass all religions, and that's how I've structured these 4 belief systems that I talk about. So they appreciated that as a caregiver, so that they can be there for the person for whom they're caring, as a doctor, a nurse, or a home health care worker, or whatever role they have. The role is to be supportive. The role is not to be persuasive about somebody's belief system. That's not that's not the role. The role is to be there fully, and you can be there fully when you really can embrace the other person's belief system, even though you don't believe it. Mm-hmm. You're embracing it, and you understand it. And when they feel non-verbally, and to some extent maybe even verbally, that you understand where they're coming from, they open up more. They can relax more, and they can die more easily. They can let go more comfortably.
And it's interesting because you have experience offering exactly that same type of understanding with people from all over the world, because, and I wanted you to tell our listeners a little bit more about this, because you offer these free telephone sessions, is that right, with people who contact you. So tell us a little more about what that experience has been like.
Sure. Yeah, so I offer free telephone sessions with people to help them deal with their death and dying issues, and I talk to them generally for about an hour, and what's happened is, what happened, I'll rewind a little bit. So what happened is I gave a talk in April last year at the Commonwealth Club in San Francisco. And it was interesting because when we set the talk up there, the only vacant spot, those of you know what the Commonwealth Club is, Commonwealth Club has been around since 1903, and there's I think 16 or 18 different groupings that you can fall into. So I fell into the humanities group. There's a politics group, there's an economics group, there's the religious group, there's all these different groups and so forth. So under the politics group, both Clintons have spoken there. Each president has spoken there. Teddy Roosevelt inaugurated the National Park System in 1903 when the Commonwealth Club opened in San Francisco in 1903. It's that kind of. It has a lot of. People know about it in a lot of different sectors, Anyway, so the only available spot for me was Monday at noon, if I wanted to do this anytime, basically in the foreseeable future in 2015. So I did this back in April. So Monday at noon, this obviously not a great speaking spot, slot for people in the middle of the day on a Monday. But when I got there, it was standing room only. There were all 90 seats were filled, and so there must be a need. And 3 media outlets came,
Wow.
and I was on and a Chinese TV station showed up, and they filmed the entire lecture, and they met with me afterwards for an hour and a half. The media did for an hour and a half in the green room afterwards, and I was on the evening news in China. There's a 2-minute spot of me on the evening news that night. But Business Insider, which is a well-known, I think it's just online news journal, did a big spot on me, and that spot's had, I think it's more than 18,000 views so far. And as a result, that's one of the top Google searches for the words fear of death. Now, so people connect with me from around the world through that. And what I found is that, interestingly, I've talked with people from Lithuania, all over Europe, the Middle East, Vietnam, India, China, Japan, you name Australia, etc., all over the world. And what's interesting is how common this fear of death is, regardless of culture, regardless of religion, regardless of the belief system. It does not matter. There's a common fear of death and fear of the dying process, etc., that is worldwide. And the other interesting thing about it is that it's age agnostic. In other words, it's across all age groups. I have 15-year-olds, 17-year-olds, 20-year-olds, and of course the first thing I say to the 15 and the 17-year-olds is you talk to your parents about this. And some of them, in some cultures, they feel that for various reasons, they won't talk to their parents, no matter how much encouragement I give them. So it's really interesting how this has developed, and eventually I'll get them to talk to their parents, and things will start. They'll start getting a local support system, et cetera, of course, which is what many of them need. But so many of them are closed up emotionally, and for various reasons. Also culturally and to some extent religiously in some places in the world. But I found that it really cuts across all religions, all cultures. It doesn't matter. People share this common fear.
It's so fascinating that you have that perspective just by virtue of people from all over the world opening up to you and coming to you. And you really play the role of an understanding listener. It doesn't sound like you're not giving people advice. You're not telling them what to do about it or how to fix it. You're simply listening and sharing this human condition of being mortal and knowing that we will die and the fear that arises within us because of that.
Well, I'm doing that, and then I listen. I always ask them, okay, first of all, before I get into any discussion with you, I always ask them, tell me about what your beliefs are about death and dying. And then very often they will have started as a child with certain belief systems, and then maybe as a teenager it changes, and maybe they're 20 and 23 years old, and then it changes again. So very often they go through several stages of an evolution, so to speak, of their own belief system about death and dying, their own belief system about the universe and God and religion and so forth. And so I listen to that, I hear that, and then I frame my comments based on what they have told me through that lens so that it speaks to them. And then I frame the understanding then based on their belief system. For example, another person I spoke with yesterday said, well, I'm thinking about changing and becoming more religious in this way. And I won't get into the details of what he said, but he gave me some details, and I said, you know what, you can do that. But based on what you've told me so far, I think what's going to be most helpful for you is getting a better understanding about where you're at now with your current belief system. I don't think changing your belief system just for the sake of changing the belief system is going to necessarily alleviate your fears. Let's talk about it from where you are now, and in terms of your current belief system, and let's talk, and then let's see if we can get you either with some group that you may select who may help you with turning within, or if you want me to, that's your choice. I don't push it on people, so I'm available to help people. So either find something that works for them, or I can teach them myself. So it was interesting because I actually saw that he was using this possible option of changing his belief system just to change his belief system, even though he didn't really believe in that, as a way to try to get himself out of this fear cycle.
That if he could change the external belief system, that might take away the internal fear he had.
Exactly. And I'm not saying that changing our belief systems per se does not have an effect from an external to an internal standpoint. But I'm an inside-out guy. I'm a work from the inside standpoint, and then we'll have a much more powerful effect outside if we're more powerful and settled and centered inside.
And I know, Kelvin, I wanted to ask you too. I know that you did a presentation, as you mentioned, for a healthcare staff, and I guess that it was at was it a home care agency?
Yeah, that particular one was a home health care agency.
Home health care. And I'm just curious about what kind of reception you found when you speak to healthcare workers.
Yeah, they really found it very valuable. When I do those presentations, I give out a feedback questionnaire afterwards, and I always ask people beforehand, to rank themselves on a scale of 1 to 10. Where are they on the kind of fear, self-assessment of their own fear about death? And afterwards, we got 97% positive results back from all the people who were, the 150 people or so who were there at the session, and some really great comments from folks. They very much found it a valuable in service for them. Not because some people are looking at it from their own personal perspective, obviously, their own personal fear of death and dying. Other people don't. There's always a handful of people who don't have a fear about death or dying, which is great. But for them, it's valuable because they get to learn about other perspectives about death, beliefs about death and dying that can help them as a professional healthcare worker, with others.
I think that's the perfect way to state it, that those of us who work in any aspect of healthcare ultimately will confront this fear of death in patients. But if we are carrying our own fear of death, that can interfere with how well we can relate to patients and how well we can go on that journey and help them. So I think it's really important to have those various perspectives about the fear. And I find it refreshing to hear about it from someone who's a little bit outside the whole arena of providing that care, to have your point of view, which it's really a big picture view, and you have this advantage of all this exposure to people from other cultures and countries and belief systems around the world, that to share. I just find your approach very wise and very informative.
I appreciate that, Karen. Yeah. I mean, living in 6 countries and and then now getting contacted from probably, I don't know, between 15 and 20 different countries, have people from different countries, 15 to 20 different countries have contacted me in the last year or so. You really get a sense for the world, and you get a sense for how similar we are as human beings around the world, notwithstanding the many differences that we have culturally, religious-wise, and personality-wise, and so forth. But how similar we are in certain really, really fundamental, basic ways, and you can't get much more fundamental and basic than this thinking about your own mortality, your own life and death, regardless of what your belief system is.
Mm-hmm.
You know.
And in this day and age right now, where we're just facing so much polarization in our own society, but also around the world, a polarization and feeling alienated from and suspicious of others. I think it's soothing to me to know that there is such a basic commonality between all of us, and death is the one thing that can pull us all together and unite us, no matter where else we stand on any other issue or where we're from. Death is the one thing that could bring us all together.
Yep, and it's guaranteed that it's going to happen. What's not guaranteed is how we're going to deal with it, and how we each deal with it, and how we each manage it as we approach it, and how we help others who are approaching it. But I'm a big believer in taking approaches that are the least confrontational when it comes to things so essential, so at our essence as death is. It's the ultimate humanity, in a sense, in all of us, and we should access that, each of us as individuals, as best we can. So that's why I've structured things the way I have in terms of the four belief systems and the way I talk about them, the examples, the stories that I give in my lectures about people who are in each of the different belief systems, and stories about their lives and stories about experiences that they've had, and so forth, that elucidate and illustrate each of those four different belief systems and how they've managed to basically reduce their fear and eliminate it, in many cases, completely, their fear of death. I also get into the related fears. People may wonder, well, what about the fear of pain and suffering? What about the process of dying, in other words? And what about the fear of punishment? And what about the fear of the lack of being able to support a loved one when that loved one, that feeling of helplessness almost, when a loved one is slipping away? Those are fears that many, many, many people are walking around with as well. They're not the fear of death, however, but they are very related fears. And the fear of eternity. Even people who believe in reincarnation, they don't have the fear of death because they don't believe in dying and that the mind dies, even though the body dies, but they can still have the fear of eternity, the fear of what I call the fear of eternity. In other words, the fear of, well, what if I mess up? What if I 100 lifetimes from now I come back as a whatever, and I just have a terrible life. How can I deal with that? And so I talk about with those types of fears, I talk about how can we deal with that now in order to set ourselves up for the future, regardless, because we don't know what the future brings. Nobody does. The future is uncertain for everybody. There's always the unknown. Nothing is predetermined, I don't think. I think free will operates all the time. We make choices, and we want to make better choices. We want to make choices that are more supportive for each of us as human beings, as individuals. And that's what I think we need to spend our time on, is figuring out in the here and now, how can we prepare ourselves now, and therefore that fear of the future, or however we want to articulate it, will dissipate.
Mm-hmm. And as I read, you wrote about in the foreword of your book, I think it was, that the more we can overcome fear, the more fully we can live in the here and now, which is what makes life rich and meaningful for us. And perhaps one of our fears associated with death is that we will die without ever really having lived. And overcoming our fear is what can help us really live right now.
Exactly. It's about living now. It's about living fully now as much as we can. All there is the continual present. The past is past, and the future hasn't happened yet. And so we need to focus and be in the continual present. I mean, people say live here now, be in the moment, live in the present, and those are all good sayings. They're good admonitions, but how do you do that? How do you get from point A to point B? It's easy to say that, but how do you do that? So that's what my work is focused on, is trying to give people tidbits of practice, tidbits of ways of thinking, tidbits of ways to understand better, and in doing so, help us be more in the present.
Mm-hmm. And I like that you used the word tidbits, because given that this journey of facing up to our fear and the challenge of fear in our own lives is so individual and unique for each one of us, that's really the best that we can do to help someone else, is just offering them the tidbits of wisdom that we've each gathered, and know that we've put it out there for others, and hopefully they can pick up what resonates with them and what's helpful to them on their journey as they're facing up to fear.
Exactly. Everybody has his or her own journey, and that person, I firmly believe, is the best person to know what that person, what's appropriate for that person at that particular time. Now, that person sometimes mind is cloudy about that and foggy. And so forth. But ultimately, that's the person who needs to make that decision in terms of what is helpful and useful and valuable information for that person, not me. So I offer the information, and like you say, there are tidbits of information that can be taken or not taken, or maybe taken and then shelved for a while, and then later it becomes useful for the person. So I think that the bottom line is, to your point, I think, is a sharing of information as much as we can with each other about death and dying. We need to talk about it more. We need to share ideas with others. I say this right at the beginning of my lectures. I say the first objective I want to try to accomplish here with everybody is to feel a little bit more comfortable to just talk about this with our friends and our loved ones and so forth. And this is something that culturally we don't do. We do a terrible job at that, and that's one of the underlying objectives, I think, of our foundation, is to try to encourage more conversation, because out of that conversation, people are going to get more comfortable with death and dying right at the outset, just by getting it off their chest and talking about it with people, even if they don't fully have an understanding about it, because again, nobody really will until they do die, but it will help relieve the pressure. It's kind of like a pressure valve. We want to relieve the pressure valve so that people can be in the moment and live more fully. Come up with the latest desalination process that will fix the water problem in the world, that's cost effective. I mean, free up that energy for useful things, in other words.
Exactly.
People come up with all kinds of amazing cures for this illness and that illness. But we need to free up that energy, because so many amazing minds are walking around with wasting that energy. I can't tell you how many minds, how many people I've spoken with who are 20 to 30 years old, who've called me from around the world. They're debilitated by this fear of death, and you can tell by how they articulate to me, sometimes in broken English, but you can tell how bright the mind is. You can just feel how the energy from that person. You can just feel their energy, their soul, their awareness, their consciousness is just very, very, very powerful and strong. And yet, it is being diverted by this fear that they have. So if I can incrementally help free that energy up in people, then even if it's 10% or 20%, free it up. It's a huge, the positive impact on that in the world community, obviously individually starting with that person, but in the world community, because of the impact that person can have, be huge.
Mm-hmm. Oh, so true. And I think that goal, that mission that you have is something every one of us can share with you, is how do we together collectively help reduce this burden of fear that possesses us as humankind, the fear of death? How can we reduce it within ourselves and help others around us reduce their own fear so we can just be here and utilize this amazing energy we have, as you said, to solve the problems that we really need to be working on.
Yeah, and just to enjoy life, really.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's ultimately the pursuit of happiness, enjoying life, however that is for an individual. As long as they're not harming other people, then I'm a big believer in whatever you want to do, that's fine.
Mm-hmm.
I have a whole other lecture on why people do cruel things to each other, but that's a topic for a different time.
Well, I'd be interested in hearing that one too. But I did want to mention, so you have a book, but it's not available yet, but people can sign up to get notification of it.
Right. They can go on the website and they can read the foreword. And then on the bottom of the page where the foreword is on my website, the foreword to the book, they can sign up, and then I'll notify them. I'm looking for publishers right now. I'm about to send out a proposal to a number of publishers, and we'll see. And if there's interest, great. And if not, then I will self-publish. But my bottom line is to get the knowledge out there. My bottom line is to get the content out there, the perspective out there, to try to help people and alleviate these fears and so forth, and get people talking about this, get people helping other people, and perhaps using the book as a tool to have discussion groups around, and maybe a tool for them to. I'm into empowering other people. I don't want to create a movement around me. I want to create a movement worldwide that empowers each individual to start their own thinking process, their own groups, their own discussion in their living room and so forth around death and dying, to help people feel more comfortable with death and dying through their own lenses, whatever they are. And that's my ultimate goal. That's my objective.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's fantastic. And before we come to the end of our conversation, I wanted to change gears slightly, because there's something else I read on your website that you are just now beginning to offer. And I just wanted to put this out for everyone to hear about too, that you are offering yourself as a medical power of attorney agent for people. And I just was hoping you'd describe that to us a little bit.
Sure. So most of the people who probably listening understand what a medical power of attorney is and what a medical power of attorney agent is. But for those who don't, I'll just say, medical power of attorney is a is a form, is a document that you can fill out, and people should probably, all do it, I would say. And because what it does is it gives you the opportunity, while you are healthy and clear-minded, etc., to choose somebody, and that's what's called the agent, the medical power of attorney agent, to choose that person to make your healthcare decisions for you in the event that you become unable to make those decisions for yourself. So, and it could be a temporary event that might do that, or it could be that you're dying and you become incompetent. So it could be a number of reasons. But the idea is that I am available. Well, first of all, the idea is that, most people, 99% of the people, do this with friends and family. So they appoint their friends and family become their medical power of attorney agent, friends or family. That makes sense. They trust them, they love them, and they understand what their wishes are, and they make sure that those wishes are followed by the healthcare providers in the event that person, the patient, what's called the principal, becomes incapacitated. Okay, well, what if they don't have any friends or family available? Maybe they have predeceased the person. Then that's a specialized area that I get involved with helping those folks. Or they're just so far away, maybe they live in Europe or Russia or Asia or something like that, and they're just way too far away. So while it certainly can be done remotely, obviously there are logistical issues if you're starting to get way far away into other countries, et cetera, et cetera. So that's, in a nutshell, what I'm offering, a service to folks, but especially the folks who have nobody, to act in that role for them.
Well, I was going to say, we know that the baby boom generation has about 20% of baby boomers have no children. And so it does seem like it will become more and more of a need as time goes on for aging baby boomers who may not have someone close enough to them to appoint as their medical power of attorney. And so I just wanted to put that idea out there of becoming an agent for people as something that others who are listening on the phone might want to consider that as something they could also offer in their communities for people who don't have anyone close enough to them or that they feel they can trust enough with their healthcare wishes.
Exactly.
That's really a wonderful service you could provide for another person.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so thanks for going off on that little tangent, because I just wanted to make sure we told people about that and offered that.
Yeah, no problem. And they can probably, each person in their own state can just look at their state medical association website, and there's a form there, and it lays out what your state laws are in terms of filling the form out and so forth. But in each state, there's generally a statement, a regulation that as long as the agent is acting in good faith, cannot be criminally or civilly liable for any decision that they make on behalf of the patient. So.
Oh, okay. That's good to know. So, Kelvin, if anyone listening should want to get in touch with you, what's the best way to connect with you? Is it through your website?
I think probably through the website, yeah, overcomingthefearofdeath.org. It's just spelled all out, overcomingthefearofdeath.org. And, of course, it's a .org because it's a nonprofit organization. And then there's a contact page there, and they can send me an email, and then we can connect via email or phone that way.
So even if someone's interested in inviting you to be a speaker for their organization, or if they wanted to schedule a 1-hour telephone session with you, they'd contact you through that same forum.
Exactly. Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah. Yep.
And that's also where everyone can sign up to get notified about your book. But you also have a number of videos. And I watched the video of the news presentation from China.
Yeah.
That was just amazing. You were telling me that you had written that news show has 100 million viewers.
Right.
And so it's just incredible how this message of overcoming the fear of death is so captivating worldwide. So
Yeah, yeah. And the videos, like you say, there's a number of videos there that are available for people for free to watch of lectures that I've given, and some are, they go for, some are a couple hours long, some are an hour long, 40 minutes long, some are just short segments out of some lectures that I gave, 2 or 3 minutes here and there. So there's a whole bunch of videos that people can access, and there's also some essays that I've written on various topics, that some of which are related to specifically overcoming the fear of death, and some of the topics of the essays that I've written are just on how to live life more fully and more freely, and without fear and restriction, etc.
Well, I encourage our listeners to go to overcomingthefearofdeath.org, check out the website, and learn even more about Kelvin and his work. And Kelvin, I just want to thank you for taking time out to join me today for this conversation.
Oh, it's great. Thank you so much for having me on, Karen. Really appreciate it.
Yeah,
look forward to hearing from people.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of your work, and I hope that you'll make contact with a lot of other people who are interested in hearing more from you too.
Great.
So take care, Kelvin, and good luck in the future. And to all of our listeners today, I want to thank you too for your time and being here with us to share in the conversation, because none of these conversations would happen if it weren't for an audience out there willing and ready to listen to what we have to say. So thanks for being there. And to all of you, take care until the next time we're together, and goodbye.